Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Months ago, I started noticing something was off. My fiance had been spending a lot of time on his phone, always tilted away from me, always with this little smirk on his face. When I asked him about it, he'd get defensive. I asked who he was texting. He said it was just a friend from TikTok, someone he bonded with over some videos. I pointed out that he'd been talking to her for 3 hours straight. He told me not to be paranoid and said she was just his best friend. Then he called me crazy. That last part stung. I wasn't crazy. I knew something was wrong. But every time I brought it up, he'd turn it around on me, make me feel like I was the problem. So I stopped asking, and I figured if something was really going on, it would come out eventually. Well, it did. Last month, we got into a huge fight about completely different things. Money, household chores, the usual stuff that piles up when a relationship is already cracking at the foundation. We both knew it was over. We sat on the couch in my house, the one I've been paying the mortgage on for the past 3 years, and had the conversation. He said he thought we should end this. I agreed. I told him, yeah, I thought so too. It was surprisingly calm, almost too calm. We talked about logistics, about who would take what, about how we'd separate our lives after 7 years together. Then we got to Rosie, our dog. Well, technically my dog since I'd adopted her before we even moved in together, but he loved her too. He asked what we were going to do about Rosie. I told him I was keeping her because this was her home and my roommate's dogs were here and she was happy. He said that made sense and asked if I could just send him pictures sometimes because he wanted to know how she was doing. I agreed and told him I'd email him some photos every few months. He seemed satisfied with that. We hugged awkwardly and he started packing his stuff. The whole thing took maybe 4 hours. By evening he was gone. Here's where it gets good, or bad, depending on how you look at it. The next morning I woke up to notifications blowing up my phone. Mutual friends were texting me asking if I was okay. I opened social media and there it was. A post from him with a photo of some girl I'd never seen in person. The caption read something like, "Finally found real love and he couldn't believe he waited this long to be truly happy." Posted 9 hours ago. We'd broken up 10 hours ago. I scrolled through his profile. He'd been posting about her for weeks, but he'd hidden it from me, changed his privacy settings so I wouldn't see. Every single post I'd missed was gushing about this girl. The same girl he'd been texting for months, the same girl he told me not to worry about. I called my best friend right away. I told her she wasn't gonna believe what happened. She asked what. I explained that he posted about another woman the same day we broke up, like hours later. She asked if I was kidding and wanted to know who the girl was. I asked if she remembered that TikTok friend he kept telling me not to worry about. She said, "Oh my God." She came over that night with wine and ice cream. We stalked his social media together like pathetic detectives, piecing together the timeline. It turned out he'd met this girl online in January. The exact month I started noticing something was off. They'd been talking every single day since then. He'd been flying under the radar, deleting messages, clearing his history, and now that we were broken up, he didn't have to hide anymore. A week later, I saw another post. He'd flown 6 states away to meet her in person for the first time. And then, in what might be the most insane move I've ever witnessed, he convinced her to move into his dad's house with him. This girl left her entire life behind to move in with a guy she'd known online for 7 months and met in person once. My best friend saw the post too. She said he moved her in already and pointed out we'd only broken up like 4 weeks ago. I corrected her and said it was exactly 4 weeks today. She said that was insane and asked how I was feeling. I told her honestly I was fine and that I dodged the bullet. And I meant it. I wasn't heartbroken, I was angry. Angry that he'd lied to me for months. Angry that he'd made me feel crazy for having legitimate concerns. Angry that he'd wasted 7 years of my life. But then I remembered something. The photos. He'd asked me to send him photos of Rosie every few months, and I'd agreed. So I started taking photos. Lots of photos. Every single day when I let Rosie out into the yard, I'd follow her around with my phone. I'd wait patiently for her to find her spot, squat down, and do her business. Then I'd snap away. Close-ups, wide angles, action shots. I even took a few videos for variety. My roommate caught me one afternoon crouched in the grass with my phone pointed at Rosie's rear end. She asked what I was doing. I told her I was taking photos for my ex. She wanted to know why I was taking photos of the dog pooping. I explained that he asked me to send him pictures of Rosie and he didn't specify what kind of pictures. She started laughing so hard she had to sit down. When she caught her breath, she made me promise to let her know when I finally sent them. I've been doing this for 4 weeks now. My photo gallery is completely full of pictures and videos of Rosie pooping. Different times of day, different lighting, different poses. I've got enough content to make a calendar if I wanted to. In about 2 months, I'm going to compose the most professional email of my life. Subject line will say Rosie update. The body will say as requested, here are some recent photos of Rosie and I hope he's doing well. Then I'm going to attach every single photo and video I've collected. I can already picture him opening that email expecting cute photos of Rosie playing or sleeping. Instead, he's going to get an inbox full of our dog taking a crap. My best friend says I'm petty. My roommates say I'm a genius. I say I'm just keeping my promise. He asked for photos. I'm sending photos. Every time I take another picture, I feel a little bit better, a little bit lighter, like I'm reclaiming some small piece of power in a situation where I felt completely powerless. My family has always revolved around my younger brother's needs. He's autistic and my parents are careful not to disrupt his routines. I get it to some extent, but when it comes to my own health issues, they just dismiss me as being overdramatic. I have hyperflexibility, a connective tissue disorder, and scoliosis. My left shoulder blade grinds against my ribs, and lying down for extended periods causes serious pain. My mattress makes everything worse. It came from my older sister who had it for over 10 years, and I've been using it for more than 5 years. The foam has worn down completely, and now I can feel the metal frame digging into my back no matter how I position myself. I wake up in pain every single morning. A few weeks ago, I started coming downstairs at night to watch TV in the living room. I'd spend a couple hours there winding down instead of lying in bed suffering. It gave my back some relief before I eventually had to sleep on that terrible mattress. My brother decided this was unacceptable. He has a routine where he comes downstairs late at night, watches TV alone, and falls asleep on the couch. He has a computer in his room with access to everything the downstairs TV has, including all the passwords. I also have a TV in my room, but I can only watch it while lying in bed, which defeats the entire purpose of trying to avoid my mattress. None of that mattered to him. He started complaining immediately. I tried being reasonable. I told him he was still welcome to come downstairs. He could watch whatever he wanted on his phone. I just asked that he use headphones or keep the volume low so I could focus on my show. He refused to accept any compromise. One evening I let him know ahead of time that I'd be coming downstairs later. I thought giving him a warning was the considerate thing to do. He went upstairs and started yelling at our parents instead. I could hear him shouting about how I was destroying his routine and how unfair everything was. I expected our parents to come down and tell me to just deal with my mattress and stop causing trouble. That's how it usually goes in this house. But they must have sided with me this time. My brother came back downstairs and headed straight for me. He told me I was being selfish and that this was his time. He said I couldn't just decide to use the living room whenever I felt like it. I explained that I wasn't kicking him out and that he could still come down. I just needed him to use headphones or keep his phone on low volume. He shot back that he shouldn't have to change anything and that I had my own TV upstairs. I reminded him that he had a computer with everything the TV had and that I could only use mine while lying in bed, which was why I was down here because my back hurt. He said he didn't care about my back and that I was always being dramatic about everything. He was repeating what our parents always tell me. Of course, he thought he could say it too. He told me to just go back to my room. I explained that I was only doing this when the pain got really bad, not every night, and that he was still allowed down here. He grabbed the TV remote and turned the volume up as high as it would go. The noise was unbearable. I knew our parents could hear it from upstairs. I asked him to turn it down because it was way too loud. He refused and said that if he couldn't have the room to himself, then I didn't get to use it either. He pulled out his phone and started playing a video at maximum volume too. The TV and phone together created a wall of sound that made it impossible to think. I told him he was being ridiculous and that I wasn't even making him leave just to lower the volume. He yelled at me to leave and go back upstairs. I said I couldn't sleep in my bed without being in pain. He said that wasn't his problem. The situation was absurd. His whole downstairs routine exists because he's too tall for his own bed and it hurts him to sleep in it. Our parents have been actively looking for a longer mattress for him. But when it comes to my worn-out mattress causing me pain, I just get told to stop complaining. The deafening noise went on for 20 minutes. I couldn't hear a single word from my show. Our parents finally came downstairs. My dad asked what was going on and said they could hear this all the way upstairs. My brother complained that I wouldn't leave and that this was supposed to be his time. My mom said they talked about this already and that I could use the living room too, and that we could both be down here. My brother insisted it wasn't the same and that I was ruining everything. My dad said we both had TVs in our rooms and that if we were going to share the space, we needed to be respectful. My brother said it wasn't fair. My mom told him what wasn't fair was blasting the TV in his phone so the entire house had to listen to it, and that if he couldn't share, then he should go to his room. My brother stared at me like I'd personally wronged him. He grabbed his phone and walked upstairs, slamming his bedroom door hard enough to shake the walls. The living room went silent. Our parents headed back upstairs without another word to me. No acknowledgement of why I needed to be down there. No mention of my pain or my failing mattress. They'd stopped the argument, and that was enough for them. I stayed downstairs for another hour. My back felt marginally better from not being pressed against that metal frame. When I finally went to bed, I lay there staring at the ceiling. The frame dug into my spine no matter how I tried to shift my weight. I thought about how my brother would have his new bed soon. Our parents were handling that problem right away. Meanwhile, I'd been sleeping on this mattress for 5 years, and they acted like I was making up the pain. I'd keep coming downstairs when I needed to, a few nights a week when my back couldn't take it anymore, and my brother would keep calling me selfish for daring to exist in the same space as his precious routine. I was born profoundly deaf. My parents enrolled me in sign language classes when I was still in diapers, then speech therapy when I got older, and finally I got a cochlear implant at age 12. The implant changed things, but not completely. I could hear some sounds if people faced me and spoke clearly, but anything beyond that was hit or miss. Background noise turned everything into an incomprehensible mess, and if someone called out from behind me, forget it. I had no idea they were even trying. Over the years, I developed strategies. I watched for shadows moving in my peripheral vision, for people waving hands in front of me, for that universal gesture of someone tapping their own shoulder to suggest tapping mine. Most people were understanding once they figured out I couldn't hear them. They'd step into my field of vision, wave, smile apologetically, and we'd work it out from there. But every now and then, someone just didn't get it, or didn't want to. That Saturday started out normal enough. I needed new running shoes because my current pair had completely given up after 2 solid years of use. The soles were worn smooth, the cushioning was shot, and my knees were starting to complain. I drove to the mall around 2 in the afternoon and headed straight for one of those big athletic shoe stores. The kind with wall-to-wall metal shelving units stacked with hundreds of shoe boxes. It was packed. Weekend crowds always were. Families with kids running wild, couples browsing together, teenagers trying on the latest releases, and sales associates in bright blue polo shirts weaving through the chaos. I made my way to the running shoe section in the back corner and started looking through my options. I picked up a pair in gray and neon green, turned them over to examine the tread pattern, squeezed the heel to test the cushioning, then put them back. Too stiff. I grabbed a black pair next, checked the arch support, felt the upper material, not quite right either. I was completely absorbed in my search, turning shoes over in my hands, reading the labels, comparing features. What I didn't know, couldn't have known, was that someone had been trying to get my attention. For several minutes apparently, the first indication I had that anything was wrong was a violent shove from behind. My knees buckled instantly and I crashed forward onto the hard tile floor. I barely got my hands out in time to break the fall. Sharp pain exploded through my palms and elbows as I hit the ground. Before I could even begin to understand what had just happened, something heavy cracked against the back of my head. Once, twice. The impact made my vision swim and blur. Instinct took over and I curled into a protective ball, arms covering my head. Through the confusion and pain, I caught sight of a woman standing over me. Middle-aged, face twisted into an expression of pure fury. She was holding a shoe, not just any shoe, but a heavy hiking boot with a thick rubber sole. She raised it above her head, preparing to bring it down on me again. Then suddenly she wasn't there anymore. Someone had grabbed her by the shoulders and physically yanked her backward. She stumbled, nearly falling herself. The store manager had intervened. He positioned himself directly between us, arms spread wide, creating a barrier. I recognized him immediately despite my disorientation. We lived in the same apartment complex, Lakeside Towers, 8th floor. We'd shared the elevator probably 50 or 60 times over the past year. Always the same routine. Polite nod, slight smile, maybe a small wave. We'd never spoken, never exchanged names, but there was that comfortable familiarity that comes from seeing someone regularly. And now here he was, protecting me from a complete stranger who just attacked me. The woman was screaming at him. I couldn't make out the words clearly, my hearing aids were overwhelmed by the noise and chaos, but I could read lips well enough. She was yelling about being ignored, about terrible customer service, about disrespect, about how I deliberately refused to help her. The manager pointed directly at me, then at his own ears, shaking his head vigorously. He was speaking slowly, deliberately, making sure she could understand. I caught enough to know what he was saying. He told her I didn't work there, that I was just a customer, that I was deaf and couldn't have heard her calling me. The woman's expression shifted slightly, but not to understanding or remorse. If anything, she looked even angrier, like this explanation was somehow an insult. She tried to push past the manager, still clutching that hiking boot. He blocked her path, his body language making it absolutely clear she wasn't getting near me again. His face had gone hard, all traces of the friendly neighbor gone. He pulled his phone from his pocket with one hand, while keeping the other up defensively. That's when the woman seemed to realize she might actually be in serious trouble. The rage on her face melted into something closer to panic. She took a step toward the store exit. The manager moved with her, blocking the way. He wasn't touching her, wasn't threatening her, but his intent was obvious. She wasn't leaving. Other employees had noticed the commotion now. 3 or 4 of them had gathered nearby, forming a loose semicircle. Customers were pulling out their phones, recording everything. I could see at least 6 or 7 people with their cameras pointed in our direction. I stayed on the floor, one hand pressed to the back of my throbbing head, watching this surreal scene unfold. The woman started trying to reason with the manager. Her whole demeanor changed in an instant. The fury disappeared, replaced by this pleading expression. She was gesturing animatedly, pointing at me, probably spinning some story about how this was all a misunderstanding. The manager wasn't buying it. He stood there with his arms crossed, occasionally looking back at me to check if I was okay. I managed a weak nod, though the movement sent a fresh wave of pain through my skull. When I touched the back of my head, my fingers came away clean at least. No blood. But there was definitely going to be a nasty bump. The wait for the police felt eternal. In reality, it was probably only 10 or 12 minutes, but sitting on that cold floor with my head pounding, it stretched out forever. Finally, 2 officers walked through the entrance. The manager moved toward them immediately, already talking, gesturing first to the woman, then to me, acting out the attack with exaggerated motions. One officer broke away and came over to where I was still sitting. He knelt down beside me, his mouth moving in questions I could barely hear. I pointed to my ears and shook my head. He nodded in understanding and started speaking more slowly, more deliberately, facing me directly so I could read his lips. He asked if I was hurt and whether I needed an ambulance. I shook my head, then immediately regretted the movement. He asked what had happened. I explained as best I could, signing some of it, speaking some of it, trying to make him understand. I told him I was shopping for shoes, that I'm deaf, that I had no idea anyone was trying to talk to me, and that this woman had shoved me down and hit me with a boot. Meanwhile, the other officer was questioning the woman. She'd turned on the waterworks now, tears streaming down her face, hands waving around dramatically as she talked. I watched her telling her version of events. She said she'd asked me nicely for help multiple times, that I'd completely ignored her, that she'd only gotten frustrated because I was being so rude. She was painting herself as the victim here, but the officer kept interrupting her, pointing at things, asking questions, and there were witnesses everywhere, at least a dozen customers who'd seen the whole thing, plus the store's security cameras mounted in the corners. The officer who'd been talking to me helped me stand up. My legs were shaky, but I managed. He asked if I wanted to press charges for assault. I looked across the store at the woman. She was still crying, still gesturing, still trying to convince the other officer that she'd done nothing wrong. I turned back to the officer in front of me and nodded. Yes, absolutely, yes. He walked over to his partner and they had a brief conversation, heads close together. Then they both turned to the woman. I saw the exact moment they told her she was being arrested. Her face went completely white. The tears stopped. Her mouth fell open. She started protesting loudly, taking a step backward. But one of the officers was already pulling handcuffs from his belt. She tried to argue, tried to plead, but they weren't listening anymore. The manager came over to me as they cuffed her. He asked if I was okay and said the whole thing was insane. I told him I'd be fine and thanked him for stopping her. He said, of course, that he'd seen what happened on the security monitor in the back office. He explained that she'd just come up behind me and shoved me down without even trying to tap my shoulder or anything, then just started hitting me. He said it was completely unprovoked. I asked if I could get a copy of the footage. He told me he was already making me a copy, that the officers would want it too, but I'd definitely get one for my records. He led me to the back office, away from all the staring customers. He brought me a bottle of water and a small ice pack from their first aid kit. I pressed the ice pack against the back of my head while we waited. The officers came back about 15 minutes later. They needed my full statement for their report. I went through everything again, step by step, my hands still trembling slightly as I signed and spoke. They took photos of the scrapes on my palms, the bruises forming on my elbows. One officer tilted my head forward to photograph the bump that had swelled up. They wrote down everything, asked clarifying questions, made sure they had all the details correct. The whole process took close to an hour. When they finally finished and left, the manager walked me out to the parking lot. The store had closed its doors temporarily to deal with the situation, so it was just the two of us and a handful of employees. He told me he'd see me around the building and that if I needed anything at all, he was in apartment 814. I told him I was in 809 and thanked him seriously for everything that day. I said I didn't know what would have happened if he hadn't stepped in. He told me not to mention it, that neighbors look out for each other. He gave me that same polite nod we'd exchanged so many times before, but it felt completely different now. We weren't just strangers who happened to live in the same building anymore. I drove home slowly, carefully, my head still pounding with every heartbeat. When I got back to my apartment, I took some pain medication and lay down on my couch with the ice pack. My phone buzzed around 6:30 that evening, a text from an unknown number. The manager from the shoe store was checking in to make sure I was doing okay. I saved his number and texted back that I was managing. Thanked him again. We exchanged a few more messages. He told me the woman had been charged with assault and battery, that the store was cooperating fully with the police, and that I'd have the security footage by Monday. 3 days later, I got a call from the district attorney's office. They wanted to meet with me about pressing charges. I went in, gave another statement, watched the security footage they'd received from the store. Seeing it from an outside perspective was surreal. There I was, completely oblivious, examining shoes. Then the woman appeared in frame, walking up behind me. Her mouth was moving. She was clearly saying something. I didn't react because I couldn't hear her. She tried again, louder apparently, based on her body language. Still nothing from me. Then she just reached out and shoved me as hard as she could. I watched myself fall. Watched her grab that hiking boot off the shelf. Watched her bring it down on my head. Once, twice. Then the manager appeared, pulling her away. The attorney told me the woman was claiming temporary insanity, that she'd been having a bad day and just napped. But the video showed premeditation. She grabbed the boot deliberately, used it as a weapon deliberately. This wasn't just losing her temper. This was assault. The case went to court 6 weeks later. I testified about what happened, about being deaf, about how there was no way I could have heard her calling me. The manager testified about what he'd seen. Multiple witnesses testified. The security footage played for the jury. The woman's lawyer tried to paint her as a victim of her own stress and frustration, but the jury didn't buy it. They found her guilty of assault and battery. The judge sentenced her to 90 days in jail, 2 years probation, anger management classes, and ordered her to pay me $3,000 in restitution for medical bills and emotional distress. When I left the courtroom that day, the manager was waiting in the hallway. He'd taken the morning off work to be there. He said justice had been served. I thanked him for being there and for everything he'd done that day. He said that any time that's what neighbors do. We rode the elevator up to the 8th floor together that evening. Same building, same floor, but everything was different now. I never did buy those running shoes from that store. I ordered them online instead. I needed this job when I started 4 years ago. Back then I was barely scraping by, living in a studio apartment with nothing but a mattress on the floor and a microwave that only worked if you held the door shut. I figured if I put in my time and showed up every day, eventually I'd get some basic respect around here. That was my first mistake. Every single year around the holidays, I'd put in my request to visit my family. They live 8 hours away and I only get to see them once a year because of how tight money is. And every single year my boss would deny it. His excuse was always the same thing about seniority-based scheduling. I didn't even know what that meant at first. I just thought maybe I hadn't been there long enough yet. Year 2 rolled around and I tried again. Same result. My boss pulled me aside and gave me this whole speech about how the holiday season is our busiest time, and how certain people get priority because they've been here longer. Fine, I could accept that. I kept my head down and worked through another Christmas. Year 3 was the same story. By that point, I'd watched so many people come and go through this place. New hires would last maybe 2 months before they quit or got themselves fired for not showing up. I was becoming one of the veterans by default. Still got my request denied though. My boss said something vague about the policy and told me to be patient. This year I put my request in back in August. I wanted to get ahead of it. I filled out the form perfectly and submitted it months before anyone else would even think about Christmas plans. I felt pretty good about my chances this time around. Last week I was looking at the schedule board in the back and noticed something weird. 6 different people had Christmas week marked as approved time off. All 6 of them started working here this year. Some of them had only been here for 3 months. I stood there staring at that board trying to make sense of it. I found my boss in his office doing paperwork. I asked him about the Christmas schedule and pointed out that those 6 people got approved. He confirmed it, like it wasn't a big deal. I reminded him they all started this year while I put my request in 5 months ago and had been here for almost 4 years. He said it was more complicated than that. I brought up what he always told me about seniority. He looked at me and explained that they all have young families and kids need their parents around during the holidays. Then he said, I don't have children, so I should understand why this matters more for them. I asked again about the seniority policy. He told me to be a team player and pointed out that I'm single without those responsibilities, so it makes more sense for me to work. I left his office before I said something I'd regret. That night I went home and pulled up our actual employee handbook online. I read through the whole section about holiday scheduling. Sure enough, it said preference would be given to senior staff for holiday scheduling, but there was absolutely nothing defining what senior actually meant. No mention of tenure, no mention of families, nothing specific at all. That's when I got an idea. I went to one of those print shops and had business cards made up. They said Senior Gastronomy Officer was my name underneath. Then I ordered a custom name tag that had Senior before my regular name. The next day, I wore it to work. My boss saw it during the morning shift. He asked what was with the new name tag. I told him I was just updating it to match my legal documentation. He squinted at it for a second and then shrugged and walked away. I guess he thought Senior was actually part of my legal name somehow. From that point on, I committed to the bit completely. I started signing every single message in our staff group chat ending with Senior Team Member. Whenever we got new hires, I'd introduce myself during their first shift as a senior employee here. I'd say it casually, like it was just a normal fact everyone should know. The new people would nod and accept it without question. My boss started getting annoyed, but what could he actually say? According to the handbook, I was senior staff. I had the longest tenure after him. I had the business cards and the name tag to prove it. Then I remembered another section of the handbook. It said employees acting in senior management capacity get scheduling priority. So I started volunteering to cover every single one of my boss's shifts. For 2 straight months, I took over whenever he needed time off or wanted to leave early. I documented everything in the system. Every shift swap, every time I handled manager duties, all of it went into the records. Yesterday, I printed out a 12-page packet. I included my hire date compared to everyone else. I listed every shift I'd covered in a management role. I highlighted the exact wording from the handbook about senior staff and scheduling priority. I attached copies of my business cards and a photo of my name tag. I even threw in a chart showing my attendance record versus everyone else's. I walked into my boss's office and put the whole packet on his desk along with a new copy of my Christmas vacation request. I told him I was resubmitting it, and everything he needed was in there. He picked up the packet and started flipping through it. His face went red. He looked like he wanted to rip the whole thing in half and throw it in my face. But he just stood there staring at all those pages. He knew I had him cornered. Every single thing in that packet was technically correct, according to the rules he'd been using against me for years. Finally, he just tossed the packet back on his desk and walked out of the office without saying anything. He was gone for like 20 minutes. When he came back, he had this defeated look on his face. He picked up a pen and signed the approval line on my request form. He told me fine, I could have Christmas week. I thanked him and said I appreciated him following the seniority policy. He didn't respond to that, just turned back to his computer and started typing aggressively. I walked out of there with my approved request form and couldn't help smiling. 4 years of getting denied, and all it took was me pretending to be senior staff until everyone just accepted its reality. I basically invented my own position in the company hierarchy and forced them to acknowledge it. I landed a part-time gig at the university computer lab back in 2018. I'd watch over students using the computers, help them print their stuff, and sort out any issues with their university accounts. Nothing too complicated. The full-time guy who worked the morning shift was already there when I started. From day one, he made it clear that he thought he was some kind of genius surrounded by idiots. Every conversation with him felt like a test. I was somehow failing. He'd go on and on about how underappreciated he was, how nobody recognized his talents, how he deserved so much better than this place. Thing is, the dude barely did anything. He'd sit at his computer all day, browsing random websites and listening to music while getting paid. It was honestly the cushiest setup I had ever seen. Our shifts barely overlapped since I started in the afternoon just as he was leaving, so we only interacted for maybe 10 or 15 minutes each day. Those few minutes were always terrible though. He talked down to me constantly. Everything I said got dismissed or mocked. If I mentioned fixing something, he'd tell me I probably made it worse. If I suggested a better way to organize the filing system, he'd laugh and say it was stupid. He treated me like I was completely useless and shouldn't even be there. Other university staff warned me about him pretty quickly. He was notorious for being the most irritating person on campus. He'd file complaints about the tiniest things that had nothing to do with him. Students hated dealing with him. The administration dreaded seeing his name in their inbox. He just loved causing problems and acting like he was the only person who cared about standards. One afternoon, things got seriously weird. I showed up for my shift and found him still there, which was unusual. He immediately locked the lab door behind me and turned off the internet router. He told me we needed to talk and that someone could be listening through the microphones, so he had to kill the connection. I asked him what was going on. He explained that there was a rat in the lab and that someone had been breaking in at night to use our computers for mining cryptocurrency. He said he was going to smoke them out. He was staring at me so intensely it made my skin crawl. He continued saying that once he caught them, they would be punished severely. He added that if he had anything to do with it, he would beat them himself. I told him that was fine and to go ahead and catch whoever it was, but I also suggested he ease up on the whole beating people thing, since that wasn't really his call. I reminded him that the administration should handle any punishment. He slammed his hand on the desk. He yelled that the administration wouldn't find out. He added that even if they did, they could do whatever the hell they wanted because he would enforce his own punishment regardless. The guy was completely unhinged. His eyes had this wild look in them and he kept glaring at me, like I was the one he suspected. I just nodded and tried to act normal until he finally left. A few days later, I overheard him on the phone in the office. He was telling someone that everything was in place now. He said he was going to catch the rat and dispense punishment. He told them that the person wouldn't know what hit them. Weeks passed after that. He never mentioned catching anyone, never brought up the supposed break-ins again. But something felt off about the whole situation. I started looking around the office more carefully. That's when I spotted it. A tiny camera hidden on the bookshelf directly above my desk. The angle was all wrong for monitoring the actual lab where students worked. It was pointed straight at my workspace in the office. The paranoid idiot had installed a secret camera to spy on me. He was so terrified of losing his do-nothing job that he'd gone full surveillance mode on his own co-worker. And he'd never told the university about any of this. No approval for the camera, no official report about the alleged break-ins. He was playing vigilante detective all on his own. I decided I'd had enough of his garbage, but I didn't confront him about the camera. Instead, I waited for the right moment. A couple of weeks later, I ran into the department director in the hallway. We chatted for a bit, and I casually brought up the situation. I asked him if they had caught that person breaking into the lab yet. I mentioned the one who was supposedly mining cryptocurrency on our computers. The director said he had no idea what I was talking about. I acted surprised and said I figured my co-worker would have told him by now. I explained that he had installed a camera to catch them, and that it was really smart thinking on his part to be so proactive and responsible about security. The director's expression shifted immediately. He asked if my co-worker had installed a camera without authorization. I confirmed that he had but mentioned we should probably reposition it. I explained that right now it was just pointing at my desk in the office instead of the actual lab. I said we were never going to catch anyone that way. I could see the anger building in his face. I added that my co-worker seemed really concerned about it. I mentioned he had said whoever was breaking in would be punished severely. I also brought up that he had talked about beating them himself. The director asked me to repeat what I just said. I told him again that my co-worker had gotten pretty intense about the whole thing. I explained he had talked about enforcing his own punishment regardless of what the administration decided. The director thanked me and walked off quickly toward the administrative building. His jaw was clenched tight. The fallout was swift and brutal. My co-worker got called into a meeting that lasted over 2 hours. When he came back to work the next day, he looked absolutely miserable. He wasn't fired, but they destroyed his comfortable setup completely. First, they ripped out his camera and banned any personal surveillance equipment. Then they moved him to a different office with a massive window right behind his desk. Anyone walking by could see exactly what he was doing on his computer at all times. No more gaming, no more watching videos, no more doing absolutely nothing while collecting a paycheck. They made him come in every single weekend to personally verify that nobody was accessing the computers remotely for cryptocurrency mining. He had to spend his Saturdays and Sundays sitting in that lab checking logs and running diagnostics. They also made the security guard do rounds through the lab multiple times every night to check for intruders. I felt a bit bad about that since the guard was a nice guy, but it wasn't my fault. My co-worker was the one who claimed people were breaking in without ever reporting it properly. My contract ended about a month after all this went down. By then he looked absolutely defeated. Every time I saw him, the job he loved so much had become actual work. I heard he quit a few months after I left, couldn't handle having to do his job properly anymore. Funny how his biggest fear of losing that dream position came true. Not because someone replaced him or because he got fired, but because his own paranoia and recklessness turned paradise into hell. We never did find any evidence of that mysterious cryptocurrency rat. I'm still not convinced there ever was one. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.